If you're interested in getting a certificate of attendance to be able to use for training plan or for CEUs later, please sign in into the chat so we can keep a list of attendance. Thank you. I'm going to get it a couple more minutes because we have a bunch more people that are joining. But if you are interested in getting a certificate of attendance to use for CEUs, please introduce yourself, your name and where you're from in the chat. We'll count that as attendance. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started, but please continue to place your name and where you're from in the chat if you are interested in getting a certificate of attendance to use for CEUs yet later or for a training plan that you might need. But I want to be cognizant of everyone's time. So thank you for joining us today to hear about vanquishing the energy vampire. I'm going to turn on my video for just a moment so you can see who I am, but I have three screens going. So looking at chat will be look like I'm looking at the ceiling, so I'm not going to keep the my video on, but hi, I'm Nancy Carlson. I am the Disaster Behavioral Health Program Coordinator here with the Minnesota Department of Health in our Division of Emergency Preparedness and Response. Turn that off. Okay. So our objectives for today are to define and identify the characteristics of a healthy professional relationship. We're going to identify key characteristics and behavioral traits of the 6 types of emotional vampires. We're going to discuss individual, group, and organizational impact of an emotional vampire. And we're going to provide some actionable tips and concepts to really assist you in dealing with a difficult team member to kind of offset some of those negative impacts of their actions. And then we're also going to learn a framework that can assist supervisors or team leaders, or maybe even you, depending upon how much control, if it's a personal situation, in correcting some of the, or countering maybe even some of the unproductive work behaviors that you see or personal interactions. So let's move forward here. First, I'm going to ask you all to kind of be interactive with me today. And so I'm going to ask, my first question that I'm asking is, how do you know when a personal or professional relationship is healthy? Does anyone want to share that in the chat with me? Because I really would hope that you all could be really interactive in the chat today because you learn just as much, often even more sometimes, in these trainings from each other. Marie goes, you feel good about it. And being with them gives you energy. You're comfortable sharing ideas, concerns without judgment or being nervous. You get along and share ideas. There's mutual trust. Continue. Oh, you leave the interaction feeling better than before it. These are all wonderful. Continue to put these in. I'm going to move forward because you just said a whole bunch of the stuff that really are on this slide. There are a lot of different types of relationships. We all have personal ones, professional ones, we have families, we have all kinds of different types of relationships. Some of them are really transactional. They're we're do something for somebody and they do something for us. That could be business and that could be a personal one, but there is that exchange of energy, as many of you talked about. There's that each of you can make each other feel better when you leave it. And it's trust. Somebody mentioned trust in here too. There's a mutual sense of trust. The communication feels good. There's that collaboration that some of you also mentioned within it. There's also acceptance of the diversity of the individuals that are inside this relationship. There's that basic foundational trust, and you're able to really give and receive empathy and compassion. On the flip, though, how do you know when a personal or professional relationship is unhealthy? Yeah, you're on your guard. You don't want to see that person. They don't respect your boundaries. You feel like you're walking on eggshells. This is the kind of person we're going to talk about today. Sometimes we may call them energy vampires. They're also lead to these toxic relationships. You give more than you're getting. So you feel devalued and depleted. You feel unsupported, misunderstood. You may feel attacked. Your emotional well-being is threatened. You feel constantly disrespected or that your needs aren't being met. You feel like your self-esteem is being crushed, maybe inside that relationship. There may be an individual that thrives on creating drama. They might spread this knowingly or unknowingly. So I want to clarify that to start with. Sometimes the energy vampire that we're talking about today may not even realize that they're the energy vampire. They may not even realize that they're doing this. And we're going to talk more about that as we move through some of this presentation today. But they thrive on this drama. There's constantly drama going on around them. And it is draining that energy from everybody else. That's why people are avoiding them or they're on guard. It makes you feel your emotions get reduced. You might feel angry or depressed or even just frankly tired after speaking with them. And they add that negativity to your life. It's one of those relationships, and you may have these, and you may know this. I know this because I've been in a bunch of these type of relationships, and I assume that many of you have too, where you have friends where you get together with them, and there may be one or more, because behavior thrives inside groups. It brings out the same behavior in other people, where you're with a group of people and you feel just drained when you leave. Or there's another group of people where you feel great, that they bring out the best in you, and some may bring out the worst in you. And you may spend a whole bunch of time trying to strengthen yourself after you've been in contact with those individuals. The energy vampire really feeds off those toxic relationships and environments. So this is just a little quick one. It's going to really reinforce all the things that you just said. It's a quick little video.
So allow me to give you an energy vampire scenario. How do people really suck the energy out of you? So you wake up feeling full of energy and just absolutely wonderful. You're just chilling and relaxing on a Saturday afternoon, still feeling great. A friend drops by unexpectedly, complaining about everything in his life, and he goes on and on and on until he zapped all the energy right from you. Then he says, "Thanks, I feel so much better after talking to you," and he leaves with a smile. You go back in the house and you feel completely drained. So what just happened? You just had the energy drained right from you.
So that's really when we're talking about an energy vampire, they're that individual that repeatedly takes, like I said, they may be aware or not aware of how they are taking the energy from others, but it's really by their unmet needs. They have things that are going on with them that they need to continue talking to other people about it. And we find them everywhere. You find them, like I said, in your work, you find them in your personal life. Oftentimes there's this feeling of the victim with them. There's we haven't had a whole lot of research in this area, but there's been some anecdotal social phenomenon type of research that's gone on. But it's if you're a person who is sensitive and compassionate, and most of us are, we work inside the fields we work in because we are those sensitive, compassionate individuals. We're that kind of person that is always trying to lend it, a listening ear, a kind heart, and endless energy to support other people. Energy vampires are the ones that will notice those people that are giving and out there. And they're the ones who are going to drain your emotional energy. They will come to you because they know that you are the person that's going to give them support. So that willingness of yours to listen and care is what also leaves you more open to feeling exhausted and being depleted by people who are sucking that energy from you. And as we said, that could be anybody. That could be friends or family. During this presentation today, I want you to think about, that could be friends, that could be family members, it could be coworkers, it could be your neighbor, as we just saw in that video. So we're going to talk about in a couple seconds here how you can identify and really respond to this type of behavior to protect yourself, your emotional and physical distress. So some of the things that you see with an energy vampire is, that they like to dominate discussions. They may be whining or blaming or bullying. They might be needy or insecure or the gossip. They really enjoy this talking about these guilt trips and setting people feeling guilty about what they're doing. But they're really at the bottom, at the basis of this all, they lack a social and emotional awareness. There's not really any single personality that qualifies as an energy vampire. There's all kinds of people that can drain you mentally and emotionally for a whole variety of reasons. But some of the most common traits and behaviors really include this lack of accountability. They won't take responsibility for what's going on in their life. So they're constantly blaming somebody else or an external situation or as a stressor for their actions, as the reason why they're acting the way they are. They feel like, you know, they like to keep the attention on themselves, the limelight on themselves. They often make you feel like you might be beneath them or dismiss your problems because theirs are always worse. They might be open to asking how you are, and then you start to talk about it, and then they'll one up you. Theirs is much worse. They had the same thing, but it was all much worse that happened. Because there's this feeling of needing to be at the center of the dramatic situation. Whether they're the person that instigates an issue or someone who took, sides of something, the energy vampire is going to play the victim. They're going to want your empathy and even expect you to try to find ways to fix what's going on with their problem. They often dominate discussions. And these aren't like a healthy venting session, which can be good in dealing with things. No, these are more like an emotional dumping where they come up to you and it's not like a give and take conversation like we talked about, a mutual conversation. This is one where somebody comes up to you, as we just saw that video, and dumps all their stuff on you. And of course they feel better because they got it out, but then they leave. They take advantage of your caring nature by trying to steal too much of your time or making you feel guilty because you're not giving them enough of your time. They tend to be bullies, because they make other people feel small, even that's unintentionally. It stems from their own, allergies, their own insecurities. So they just want other people sometimes to feel as miserable as they do. And some of the things that contribute to the energy vampire's behavior, it could be that they have, it could be that they have a mental health diagnosis. They may have developed some type of codependency. Sometimes people who are insecure, avoided, have anxious attachment styles during childhood. So they develop these natural inclinations towards energy vampire behaviors because they don't know how to interact with other people. It could be that they are just in pain all the time and they don't know how to move out of that pain or what's going on within them to be able to look at anything outside of themselves. Obviously, like I mentioned earlier, they could have a mental health diagnosis. They could have a personality disorder. A lot of our personality disorders tend to go with some of these behaviors, like narcissistic personality disorder, or even histrionic or borderline. It could be that they've learned to get what they need by acting like this. It could be that they've learned how this learned helplessness helps them to get what they need to meet their needs in life. It could just be a person too who has some unresolved trauma or abuse inside their life, and they don't know how to deal with this chaos and toxicity that's gone on for them. And so they just are repeating it again inside their behaviors. Unfortunately, energy vampires not only have a detrimental impact on the work environment, but also the staff, and then also how the staff is able to perform, because that negativity is contagious. If one person is feeling stressed, it could ripple through the whole team. If an energy vampire is constantly complaining about their job or their teammates or their workplace, it makes the whole place. It drains energy from the whole team. It drains energy from the whole workplace. So they're truly that person at work or in their personal life who sees that glass half empty. They never are able to look beyond what's going on inside their life, and they don't deal well with change. As someone who works in emergency preparedness, this is not someone to be working in this area because, you need to be flexible and deal with it. They don't deal well with change, and they will do anything not to embrace that change, including undermining the efforts of others. If there's a change management going on, they could be big procrastinators. And that can detriment the whole projects that teams are working on. So there's huge things that are going on at the workplace. If any of you seen this, What We Do in the Shadows, and Colin, he's a perfect example of an energy vampire in the workplace.
Hop on electric
Let's get
e-bikes,
past
brand
this.
new Electric One. Named one of the best electric bikes of
Please
2024
excuse this.
by
I can't
Bicycling Magazine.
skip past it.
Shipping
there it
free
is.
to your door.
My name is Colin Robinson, and I am what's known as a psychic vampire or energy vampire. This is my office, also known as the hunting ground. Hi, Deb. Energy vampires drain people's energy merely by talking to them.
Actual versus budget year to date? No thanks. You're going to be at that all day.
We either bore you with a long conversation.
Feeling better now. I was a little sick this weekend. Hey, Don.
Or we enrage you. In fact, you probably know an energy vampire. We're the most common kind of vampire. We are day walkers, not affected by the sun. And we are the only kind of vampire that can drain another vampire's energy. It's very cool.
So I'm going to talk about 6 different kinds of energy suckers or energy vampires today. You may hear this described in a variety of other titles or different numbers of them, but these are kind of the 6 most common ones that you might deal with. There's the victim. That's the person who is the chronic victim. They're always ready with the new sob story about some perceived slight. They're always the innocent in every situation, but the whole world is against them, it seems like. They tend to complain often and loudly about their problems. Then there's the criticizer. That's the person who spends all their time and energy criticizing other people, things, situations. Nothing's ever good enough for them, and they can find fault with just about everything. Then there's the dramatizer. These people create a lot of drama. They always seem to be in the midst of some catastrophe that they need your help dealing with. They're not able to really manage what's going on. Then there's the manipulator. Now, the manipulator has also been called like the narcissist, or AKA also the dark empath. They are because they are empathetic, okay? They are able to understand what other people are experiencing. But instead of using that skill of empathy to support someone else, they turn it to manipulate the situation to their advantage. They rarely say what they mean, and they usually have some type of hidden agenda. Then there's the negative thinker. Some people, like I said earlier, are always able to see the glass half full. They're the ones who always see the worst in a situation. They see the glass empty. They can be always counted on to point out the dark side or the potential problem with something. They're a little bit different than the criticizer. The criticizer is criticizing what's going on. They're just There's no hope for the negative thinker. Everything is always at the worst. It's catastrophe going on constantly. Then there's the blamer. They're quick to place the blame on somebody else because they're never at fault for what's going on. And unlike the victim, who is always the victim in it, they may not be the victim, but they're always going to make sure that they're blaming somebody else for what's going on and handing out lots of guilt and shame to other people. So I want to take a few minutes for us to do some chat conversation here. Is there an energy vampire in your life, personally or professionally? Has their behavior had a negative impact on you? And how has their behavior proven detrimental to the team or organization? If you feel comfortable, can you please share some examples in the chat? I'm going to share a personal one while people are filling this in. Years ago, I worked for a different organization. I worked at a county level, and I had a friend who was also a coworker. She was a personal friend and a coworker. And she was a person who was very needy, very needy. There were times where things were going on in her life where I swear one time my family even counted this. I had 25 phone calls in 2 minutes because I didn't answer it. I have that feeling of energy being sucked from me every time I spent time with a conversation. And I had to finally, even though I really enjoyed this person, and it was difficult because I worked really closely with them too at work, I had to cut them off and set some very firm boundaries because it was just sucking me dry. I was not enjoying work. I was not enjoying even time at home because I was having to hide from phone calls. So yes, someone just said walking on eggshells, that boundaries component. There are behaviors that impact you at work and in your personal life. And I understand no one wants to share, but if you do continue to place that in the chat, I've had the problem based on what you've been saying. I will say I hate change, but I'm also the one you want an emergency. If you can get past it, it's understanding this about ourselves, hating change, but if you can get past it when it's needed, that's the important thing. So thank you for sharing that, Monica. I'm going to move forward. So what are the impacts upon us as an individual? We've talked about some of these already, but we're going to go over them again. That emotional and physical fatigue. Sometimes we might have confusion. We might be overstimulated by what's going on because we're trying to be helpful and it's not working. Or we may get to that apathy. I just don't care anymore. I got to that point and with people in the past. Yeah, and that's what Heidi's kind of saying too. Someone that was so negative about others, you had to stop talking to them about anything because they always had something negative to say about anyone you talked about. You may end up having some chronic stress about the situation or just feeling burnt out. And those individuals too may cause they may be obviously using maladaptive coping mechanisms, but they may cause you to be using some of them too. You might think I'm drinking more or I'm smoking more, I'm eating more, I'm not dealing with my stress healthy because of this that's going on. Or you're withdrawing, or you're having anger and frustration. And it impacts your group too. When you have one person that is acting out on any of these behaviors, it really impacts the trust and respect within your team, within your work group, even your whole section or division. It breaks down communication. Because if you've got one person blaming everyone, some people don't even want to say anything then. So it increases tension and stress. It increases vulnerability and the team cohesion. It undermines all of the organizational interests, values, and goals. It increases employee turnover for sure, creativity, and just the reputation of the community, of the organization itself. If people if there's problems going on within the organization, eventually those get seen by the outside and how the outside views that organization. If you've been exposed for any period of time, but especially for an intensive exposure to an energy vampire, you're going to feel that emotionally exhausted, depressed, confused, irritable, anxious, and it's going to impact your productivity, your motivation, and just your emotional well-being. So what can we do? Well, we can set clear boundaries. It is possible when you have an energy vampire that you're dealing with, or a toxic individual, that you can show compassion and care while still establishing reasonable boundaries. If you can set strong boundaries for how much time you spend with that person, where meet with them, um, you know, if you focus on yourself, making sure you have a strong work-life balance, and explaining to that emotional vampire that you're no longer going to talk to them about this issue, this problem. There's no need to be rude or unkind about it, but it's important that we learn how that there are times to switch off our natural instinct to help or indulge a person that cannot be helped. There comes a point where there are people that we're at a place where us spending time with them, trying to help them, trying to be caring and understanding, is hurting us. And when we notice that it's hurting us, then we have to set boundaries. Because if we allow that to continue, then we can't help other people effectively. We have to set that boundaries up for ourselves. So we have to take that limit of how quickly we respond to their messages or phone calls, or just say no entirely. Some people, we might have to just say, I can't, no, I'm not going to be interacting with you. Or even if you have to go to a supervisor or leadership and just say, I can't work with this person very well. We have to adjust and lower our expectations. This is especially hard if we've known this person for a long time. If it's a family member, if it's a friend, and we're aware of how they act, it's hard to expect less from them in terms of how much you want them to give of your time and their time, and how much energy you want to spend on them. You really, really want this relationship to continue, and you can't change how they act. That's the thing to keep in mind. We can't change how somebody else acts. All we can do is modify how much emotional energy we're giving, how much we're having available for them, how much we're providing for that relationship. So we have to lower our expectations sometimes and not beat ourselves up over our inability to maybe communicate effectively. There is peace that we can find inside of relationships by really just accepting those things that we can't change, and just saying that I am not going to be able to make this relationship, no matter how much energy I put into it. I'm not going to be able to make it the way I want it to be, or the way that will work for me. Sometimes we have to just truly just distance ourselves, stop being available. Uh, energy vampires gravitate to those people that are ready to listen to them. So if you can keep a safe distance away from, the workplace energy vampire, or even the personal one, that distance emotionally and physically, if you can shut the door on them, whether it's an emotional door or a physical door, and you can limit your exposure. Don't share things with them. Don't confine your own, don't confide in them. Don't share your secrets or your dreams. You might be focusing more energy on other relationships or on yourself than on this one. The less available that you are, the less likely that they're going to come up to you and look for you for sympathy or problem solving. And the last one is, and this is really a comfort level one, because sometimes this is something you can do, and sometimes this isn't something you feel comfortable doing. But be honest with them. If you find yourself close enough to this energy vampire, if it's a relationship where you feel safe in saying and talking with them, you may want to engage in a healthy conversation about your relationship and how it makes you feel. But you might not be able to do that, or even want to do that. It may be that you just need to, cut them out of your lives if you can, you know. But if you're going to have a conversation with them, then there are some tips that we can give you for engagement. Okay. When you engage with a toxic person, or as we've been calling them, energy vampires, one helpful method to use is the wise mind. A lot of times with the energy vampire, we're using our emotional mind. That's why they're sucking our energy. We're using our emotions are out there. And then we may try to deal with them. Okay, I'm not going to be emotional. I'm going to flip to using rational mind, where, we're just looking at this with facts and stuff. But the best way is to do that is to look at the wise mind. It's a technique used in I'm fumbling on it, but DBT. It's a therapeutic method of navigating challenges, it's life situations and decisions. So staying in that wise mind, using your intuitive thinking, staying that balance between emotions and rational components. So we want to use wise mind and not just be emotional inside the situation. We want to emotionally, like I said, detach a bit from that, because otherwise that's what they're going to be feeding on. All right. We want to reflect on our worth. We want to remind ourselves that we have value, and it's okay to put ourselves first inside some of these situations. We want to remember that we have the power to choose how we're going to react. We can't let somebody else force us to react inside a certain way. That's a power that we have. And we can still practice empathy with someone who may be a toxic person. But that's just understanding that they're going through their own struggles, which, can help you to understand not to take their actions personally. And that's a way that we can be empathetic with them, to remember that it's their problem, and it's the behavior that's the problem, not the person. It's not dumping it all onto we don't like this person. One of the things that we talk about a lot inside Skills for Psychological Recovery, which is another training we do, and you may have heard it under the framework of reframing, is using helpful thinking rather than unhelpful thinking. Finding a way to look at the situation in a way that is not going to make you feel bad, is not going to make it, is looking at the positives in it. Then focusing on your professional values and goals to guide it. We're going to get a little bit more into this in a minute. So cognitive shifting is one way to modify your behavior when you're dealing with this emotional vampire. Something happens. There's an event that happens. Someone comes up to you, a toxic person comes up to you, and they're talking about something that's going on. You interpret it, and it may be too that you have a distortion as you're thinking about it. You don't interpret it in the way that's clear, but how you interpret whatever's going on impacts how you feel about it. It impacts your emotions, which impacts your behavior. So cognitive shifting is the brain's ability to adapt your behavior and thoughts to new, changing, or unexpected events. In other words, your shifting is the ability to see what you're doing isn't working and to make the appropriate changes to adapt to new situations. You can't, once again, saying this again, you can't change how someone else acts, but you can modify how much emotional energy you're giving them inside your interactions with them. So the energy vampire, like I said, once again, will gravitate to the person that's giving them energy. So when we're talking about an intervention here, that's looking at how you can shift that distortion. Let's talk a little bit more about what some of the cognitive distortions are. And we've all probably experienced all of these inside a variety of different situations. You may not have them all the time, but you have them, but we probably have all experienced quite a few of them inside our personal and professional life. There's that all or nothing thinking that, something's got to be 100% good or it's 100% bad. Catastrophizing, jumping to the worst possible conclusion for something, overgeneralizing. You see a pattern of everything's going to be horrible because you've had one horrible event happen. Those mental filters, only paying attention to certain types of evidence. I'm only looking for stuff that go along with what I agree with my own personal cognitive biases. Otherwise, it doesn't agree. It's not accurate. And maybe discounting some positive information or twisting it into a negative. Oh, I won this award. Oh, that means I'm going to have to because I won this, they're going to think I can do more work. It's twisting something positive around, jumping to conclusions, mind reading or predicting what's going to happen because of, something that occurred, having that low frustration, saying things like this too difficult, I can't stand it, without really stopping to try it, maybe, or minimalizing the importance of something. Assuming that because we feel emotional reasoning, assuming because we feel a certain way, our hunch must be true. The shoulda, woulda, couldas, the musts, I mean, we do those all the time. I should have done this, or I must have done this to be wrong, or I ought have done this. Those shoulda, woulda, couldas. I don't know how many times I've had, after a day, I've come home and I've lied in bed and I'm rehashing a situation that happens. And I think I should have done this. If I would have done this, this would have happened and it would have been great. Labeling, putting labels to ourselves or others. And a lot of times we do that mostly to ourselves. We criticize ourselves and we think less about ourselves than we would ever do to anyone else. And this personalization, taking things too personally. The thing is, though, when we do some of these cognitive distortions, when something happens and we jump to one of these cognitive distortions, then that impacts, like I said in the earlier slide, I'm going to go back to this. That distortion impacts how we feel about ourselves, how we feel about the person that we're interacting with, how we feel about the environment and the situation. And then how we feel about things impacts how we behave. And it becomes this nasty circle of thinking things and acting in ways that we don't have to do. And that's how the energy vampire also gets us trapped, because they rely upon us falling into these cognitive distortions with what's going on with the conversations they have. So there's this framework that we're going to go through here of how you can really guide when you're dealing with this toxic relationship. We're going to pretend that this is in a work situation. Some of these may work for personal situations. It just depends upon your relationship and your ability to interact clearly with the individual that might be draining your energy. First, we want to identify the problem. Who is the problem? What is the problem? How often is it going on? How often has it happened in the past? Is it something that's been going on for a long time? Let's say we have a person at work that we'll call her, I don't know. I hate to pull out a name. Somebody might be here. We have a person that we work with who is constantly undermining the whole team because all they can see is negatives, negatives, negatives. And it's been going on ever since that person started work. So for several years now. So what is that happening to our team? How is that impact of this individual's behavior on our team? On yourself? On the organization? How do other people outside of the organization think about us? So kind of thinking about those components. And then what could be the stressors that are going on that this is causing? What kind of stress is this? Is it causing anxiety in people? Is it causing depression, anger, frustration? Is it causing some personal difficulties? Is it that, okay, I've got to go to work, but I don't want to, or I'm avoiding work because I don't want to see this person and that's causing problems? Is it impacting job satisfaction? What's going on with conflict in the work situations? And then we want to try to address the concerns. This is where it gets to, oftentimes this needs to be leadership, whether that's a supervisor or that's a team leader that can really address these concerns. So they would be the person who would have to meet with this problem individual and, identify the difficulties. Say, we have a lot of people that are feeling stress. They're feeling, some anxiety, that they're feeling a lot of negativity in the workplace. And have this conversation in a calm, warm, and authentic manner. Being empathetic, but also making sure that you're not being blaming, you're looking at the problem, as we mentioned earlier, and not the person. So there's a lot of negativity in the workplace that's causing anxiety inside staff. And gaining some insight on the perspective of the individual. What do you see with this? Are you seeing the negativity? Are there some sources of stress or problems that you're experiencing if you see the negativity? So get their perspective on this. Are they seeing this? Hopefully the person will have that ability to to have this conversation. If they're not, then this is something that you're going to have to put on a little bit of as we move into the next slide with some other steps, but hopefully they can have this conversation with you. And between the two of you, you could have a conversation about what can we do to fix this? What type of solutions could we put in place to deal with the negativity that's going on? Would it be having more one-on-one meetings between the two of you? Would it be having, even just to suggest something simple like a suggestion box where people can put notes in and feel like they're addressing things that are bothering them, whatever it might be? Is there things that we can do to address this issue? Then if there is a plan, it would be providing some feedback. If there's not a plan, it would be, okay, now we're going to have to maybe bump this up to a little bit higher of an organization to deal with this if it's in the workplace. This might be something that would have to go to an HR, depending upon the rules of whatever's going on within your organization. Hopefully the person has said that, yes, there's some things we can do, so we can work on this. And it would be using that, your empathy and sensitivity, understanding that this is the problem and not the person that's the problem. Again, use some concrete examples of what they could do. It might be if they're able to recognize that they have an issue, or even if they're not, and you have to point out that they might be the one with an issue if you're a supervisor. It might be, can we set up a time where we can actually just discuss what's bothering you? Or can I get you, what would work with you? What's feedback of, we had this plan this last time of what we're going to do. We collaborate on this plan. How is this working for you? And if it's not working for the organization or you as a leader or a supervisor, give some examples of how this is not working so that they know. Make sure that there is an understanding of the expectations if this doesn't change and what some consequences might be. Like I said, if there's not behavior changes that are going on, the consequences might be that this is an HR thing, or the consequences might be that they're no longer part of this team if they could be moved out of this team, or they're moved into a different job role if they're not able to do the one that they're at. Make sure that aligns, whatever you're doing, that it aligns with the organizational goals and with the work that you're doing, so that they can understand why this is an issue within their job role. And then obviously there would be doing a follow-up, use that emotional language to say, this is how we're feeling about what's going on right now. And this is what's going on, how things are working in the workplace. And then make sure that they know that they can tell you how they're doing and they're feeling with whatever decisions happen from the feedback. answer any questions, compliment if there's been change and improvement, and ask for some input on what other things could change. If this is still not working, then you also want to, like I said, refer on to other resources. It could be they need professional resources. It could be that there's mental health referral is needed, an EAP resource referral is needed. Maybe there's a support group where there could be some peer type to work. Maybe it's that you need to really just work with somebody else to work individually with this individual. Maybe there is a different type of job that they could do that they need some extra support. Maybe it's some training that would move them into something. So it was providing resources. And then it's to continue to assess and observe and do frequent check-ins with the team to make sure that you're checking on that individual with their behavior. And of course, you want to document what's going on because it may not be working and you may have to still go through the system to get help that's helping that individual and the rest of the team. So this is just a framework that's out there for that. There are other tools that can help you. There's some really great books that are out there. There is a social styles assessment. You can find this online and take this, and it'll also give you some information on your style of interacting with other people. Obviously, employee assistant programs have things, mental health professionals. These are some great little books that talk about what's going on with emotional vampires and dealing with them. And then you're going to get more time back because it is Halloween. And we're having our first snow here in Minnesota for those of you that aren't from Minnesota. So for those of us that are older, even though this is nowhere near the snowstorm of 91, where we had a lot of snow on the ground. Ours is already melted where I'm at. Um, I know this is still a Halloween day, and some of you may have little ones that you need to get ready for going out. But I wanted you to carry with you this last thought, this last reminder that an energy vampire can't steal your energy unless we consciously or unconsciously permit them to do so. So remember to set up our boundaries and to make sure that we're not giving too much of ourselves inside situations. And so does anybody have any questions or comments? Yeah, see, I knew bringing up that Halloween of 91. How many of you from Minnesota thought about that when you saw snow coming down today? Those of you that are old enough to remember that. Yeah, I said that was a year I sent my kids out in snowsuits trick or treating, and it still came up to almost their neck as they trudged through the snow. Oh, two at the time. Yeah, it's something. So make sure if you haven't already done so too that you check out in the chat so I can get you a certificate. Yeah, see now you're making me feel old that you weren't even born yet. I know. That's okay. I'm a grandma, so there's probably a whole bunch of you that weren't born yet. If you can check out in the chat, then I'll make sure that we get a certificate put into your MinTrain account. And everyone have a happy Halloween. I figured your name wasn't really Colin Robinson, but I did appreciate the humor of that, Sarah.
Great job, Nancy. I grabbed the chat for you, so I've got the attendance.
Great. I pulled up the wrong PowerPoint that I had one other video I was going to show. I don't know if you ever watch the, what we do in the shadows. And there's the Evie. It's when Colin meets Evie, and Evie is an emotional vampire. It was just, I thought that would have been a cute one to end with, but
Yeah.
yes, Colin knows what I'm talking about. Thank you, Hannah, for bringing that up. City council, that was, yes.
So true.
So thank you, everyone. I am going to close this up now. Hannah, you got the chat.
Yep.
Talk to everyone later. Bye-bye.